Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/NuclearRevenge. In today's episode, found my girlfriend cheating on me with my close friend, I have him arrested and ghosted her. Dad breaks into our house, we make his life hell. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Found my girlfriend cheating on me with my close friend, I have him arrested and ghosted her. So I am a long-time Redditor and decided to tell you all a story that has only just come to its final conclusion. I have created a secondary Reddit account specifically for this, as I want to protect those that are not a part of the Reddit community and change the names of all involved. Originally posted to r/ProRevenge, but was asked to post it here instead due to the nature of one of the revenge acts. Apologies if there is any spelling or grammar mistakes. Backstory: incoming sadness. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a largish town of close to 30,000 people. We knew each other at an early age, roughly 6 or 7, can't specifically remember. We were practically inseparable. At 16, we started dating each other. When we turned 18, we moved away for work in a city just a few hours' drive away. By 20, we were married and had bought our first house. At 22, we discovered that she was pregnant with a boy. It was then disaster struck. About 5 weeks before she was due to go on maternity leave, a large shelving unit collapsed and crushed her. I was told that both her and our child were killed instantly. 2 of her colleagues had also been injured in the accident, one left paralyzed, the other losing his leg after it had to be amputated. The company she was working for had, in a cost-cutting measure, decided to continue using old shelving that had been written off as unsafe instead of replacing it. I still haven't quite forgiven those executives and management personnel that made that decision, because they cut short the love of my life as well as killing our unborn child. It wasn't long after I was told I had a choice on how to proceed with what her company called compensation, but I called it blood money. They wanted to settle out of court to avoid a lawsuit. I, on the other hand, was out for their blood. Just to clarify here, this is not the revenge, this is still backstory. Fortunately, due to the coverage that it got, and involving several politicians, the case was settled quickly in court, roughly 3 years, in which the payout for all parties was close to 10 times the amount that they had initially offered. A lot of fines were given to them for breaches on work, health and safety, executives were sacked, others were jailed, etc., a story for another time maybe, when I feel comfortable sharing. In this time, I was still working my job in telecommunications. My mother, bless her soul, had moved in while all this was happening to help me. I think I would have fallen apart if she hadn't been as involved as she was. It was around this time I was offered a promotion, but it involved a lot of travel around the state. I made a request to have an office in my hometown's branch, as I wanted to not only take care of businesses in the state, but in my hometown also, as there was no business representative located there, to which they agreed. After a few months, we settled into a routine of 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown and 1 to 2 weeks visiting the rest of the state. After a year, I decided to buy a house in my hometown, so I wasn't having to stay at my parents' place every week, or so that I was home and that I could come and go as I pleased. This is important for later in the story. It is about 4 years later that our story begins. Sorry if the backstory was a bit long. I had just returned from one of my trips on Friday, and was checking in some stuff at my office when Harry, the branch's managing director, walked in. We had grown up together also, but had gone to different schools, but since coming back had developed a very close friendship. He asked how things were, and then asked me if I wanted to come to a house party that he was having that evening. Short notice and all, but I said yes. I felt like a few drinks with friends were in order. It was there that Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at the branch where my hometown's office was located and was getting to know everyone, being new in town. We hit it off immediately. As much of a cliché as it sounds, it was almost as if Rachel was in front of me, instead of Catherine. I won't bore you too much with the details, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step and she moved into my hometown's house. Everything up to this point had been going really well. Catherine and my parents got along and Rachel's parents also approved and were happy that someone could make me just as happy as Rachel had done. All was going well for close to a year when things began to change. Skype sessions were cut short suddenly. Neighbors would tell me about how a car, described to me like it was Harry's, was always seen parked in the back alley near my house whenever I was away. Some clothes that weren't mine were in my wardrobe. All signs pointed to her cheating, but she said that nothing was happening. She said that Harry would come over occasionally to discuss business, etc., but never stayed the night. I chalked it up to me being paranoid and continued on as if nothing was wrong, but there was always this feeling that something wasn't right. It was close to 6 months after that I discovered that she had been lying to me. I had just finished closing a rather large contract with a new company and negotiations had wrapped up earlier than I had anticipated. So instead of sticking around for the next few days, I decided to pay for an early flight home and surprise everyone. Fast forward a few hours and I drive into my hometown and down the alley behind my house so that I could get into the house without being seen and surprise Catherine. Some part of me was curious, however, as to whether this mystery car was there. Sure enough, there was a car that was blocking the back entrance gate. I was confused for a moment, wondering if it had just been a neglectful neighbor parking, only to realize that it was indeed Harry's car. If it hadn't been for the high hedge line that I had put in a few years back for privacy, I may have well driven past my own place. Pulling up behind his car, I got out and thought it was strange that he was there so late, as she claimed that he always had left by now. As I approached the back of the house, I saw something that stomach drop. In my kitchen, Catherine and Harry were going at it hammer and tong. I froze. Time stopped. There was my close friend, having sex on my kitchen bench with my girlfriend. I didn't know what to do. So many questions were running through my head. Was this real or was I dreaming? Why were they having sex in my house? Feeling defeated, I turned and left without them seeing me. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. I was crying hard. But the sadness quickly turned into anger. The same kind of anger I felt towards those that were responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to hurt them badly. As a pacifist, I don't believe in violence. It was then I knew I was going to punish them and destroy their lives. And what better time to start than now? I moved my car back up the alley, far enough away from my driveway that I could still see Harry's car, and then walked back to the gate where I could see into the house, and called her phone. They were still going for it when it rang. They both looked at the caller ID and did a double take when my name came up. I could see that she was considering answering it and they let it ring out. After a few moments, they were back into it again and I dialed once again. This time she did answered. As she was answering, I hung up and made my way back to my car. As soon as I did, she called me back. She asked why I was calling as late as I was, and I told her that I was about 10 minutes from home and didn't want to scare her coming in. She, obviously, was shocked and acted happy that I was coming, and the call ended very quickly after she said she was going to get up and get changed into something. I said bye and hung up. A few moments later, Harry came peeling through the gate and still half naked, jumped into his car, took off like a bat out of hell. I smiled a little, knowing the fear that both of them would be feeling from being so close to being caught. I waited a few moments before turning my car into the same place Harry had been moments earlier. The night was fairly uneventful afterwards, and it wasn't until after she was asleep that I got up and went to my office down the hall. I couldn't sleep. I needed to plan. And plan I did. The revenge. My mother always taught me to be a pacifist and to allow cosmic karma to take its course. But on this occasion, I decided that karma could use a helping hand. I decided to punish them separately but destroy both of them. I knew that Harry had a drug habit. Nothing major, but he kept it very private. I only knew about it accidentally after seeing some coke and we'd left out in his place, but pretended I hadn't seen it when he had made attempts to cover it up. I began calling some of my more unsavory clientele and made a few discreet inquiries into obtaining some samples that they were willing to part with. A few days later, I had a decent enough stash for my plan to work. About a month later, I had friends, including Harry, around for a barbecue night. After making sure that I sufficiently liquored up Harry, I told him to stay the night and sleep it off. In the early hours of that morning, I took the drugs and an assortment of my personal belongings and placed them at various places around his car, with the biggest stash in his tire well. Confident that he wouldn't find them over the few months as the rest of my plan took effect, I locked the car up and went inside to sleep. I also placed some more drugs and personal items in his house after driving him home because he was still too drunk to drive. A few days later, I staged a break-in by smashing the back pane of my back door into my kitchen and leaving it open before heading back to the city for a flight. I had several messages the moment I landed. One from my clearly panicked mom, who had found the back door smashed open and had called the police, one from Catherine in tears, and one from the local police asking me to call. After returning all the calls, I informed the police I was away on business, and that I would be back the following week to talk with them. While away, I got Catherine to stay with my parents until after I got back, and asked my dad to organize one of the local security companies to install cameras and an alarm system after getting the go-ahead from the police as to not ruin the scene of the crime. After getting home, I did the usual "my God, I can't believe this has happened and why would anyone do this" routine. After doing a thorough check of everywhere, finding that the items I had taken were missing and filing a police report, I had the security company's rep talk Catherine and I through how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the question I had been waiting for. The question of what happens if we are doing some business and don't want it recorded. She acted a bit shy asking this question. But I knew exactly the reason she was asking. He assured us that this was a question he got asked a lot, and we were shown on the home computer, if we wanted to be doing things without it being recorded, how to stop the recording for certain cameras, so that we could protect her modesty. As I was walking him out, I asked him if cameras were turned off, could a notification be sent out, just as a security precaution. He came back in and helped me through how to set up email notifications and left shortly after. Fantastic. All I had to do was wait. At this stage, I approached her/legal advice for some help in relation to couples law in my country. I needed to make sure that my upcoming plan could legally be done and that I would not be forced to pay out any money or equity to Catherine, as I didn't know if we were classified as a de facto couple or not. Being the sole benefactor of Rachel's estate, I didn't want to be left with any nasty surprises where Catherine could take any of the estate away from me. Shout out to those guys and gals there, as they helped me get in contact with a great lawyer who assured me, due to the fact that although we had been dating for close to 4 years, we had not been living together long enough to be classified as de facto, and because I was paying all the utilities on the property that she was living in and didn't pay rent, showed that she had no legal standing to make a financial claim against me. Just to be sure though, he drew up what I felt was a pretty ironclad document just in case there was any legal trouble. The following week, my work had approached me and offered me a promotion to move back to the city and run the team that I was a part of, meaning I wouldn't need to travel as often and be in the one location, and due to the success of being located in my hometown, that they were considering having 3 to 5 representatives spend 1 to 2 weeks in the larger surrounding towns including my hometown as a part of my team. I said yes, and began the process of beginning my transfer, which would take about 6 weeks. Perfect. More than enough time to gather all my evidence. Upon getting back to my hometown the following week, I began to start in motion the rest of my plan. I asked Harry to approve 1 week's worth of vacation for Catherine for 2 weeks' time. I wanted to send her and a friend or two away on a retreat before I made the biggest decision of my life for a second time. He jumped up and gave me a huge hug, congratulating me on being prepared to take the leap again. I hugged him back tight, but not the way I think he imagined it at the time. He agreed and blocked out the week for me. I asked him not to say anything to anyone, as I wanted to make it as big a surprise as I could. I knew that it would spread like wildfire around the office regardless, but that was my plan. That night, I told Catherine that I had booked her and two friends to go to a tropical spa resort, all expenses paid for a week. No questions asked, pick two friends, and come back to the biggest surprise of her life. She screamed like a kid who had just been told that all the candy in the shop was hers to have. I then told her that the following week, I was going to spend it in the city, preparing for a large client who was one of my biggest accounts, and needed some people in my team to help before flying out the following week, and I wouldn't be home until the Monday that she was leaving, so I wouldn't be able to see her, which seemed to disappoint her, but I told her it would be worth it when she returned. What I failed to tell her was that I had decided to take 2 weeks vacation on the other side of the country, mentally preparing myself for the *T storm that was about to erupt the moment she stepped foot on the plane, as well as enjoying my first stage of freedom. On Sunday 2 weeks later, I flew back and began driving home. Once getting there, I done a quick pass by my house, and sure enough, Harry's car was there. Like the first night I had caught them, I parked a little ways back and checked the cameras. Asleep, in my bed. No surprise honestly, as I had recorded them constantly do this over the 2 weeks I had been away. I then made my first call to the police, blocking my caller ID. I told them that I was one of my neighbors and saw someone hanging around in their car in the alley behind my house and occasionally passing something through windows to passing cars while also looking into my yard, and I was concerned that they were dealing drugs and were going to break into someone's property. I gave them his license plate and description. They said they would have someone there in a few minutes, so I thanked them and hung up. I then called Catherine and told her I was about 10 minutes from home, and that I knew she was flying out tomorrow, but desperately wanted to surprise her. Looking back at the footage now, I laugh at the commotion that I am surprised I didn't hear. In a few short seconds, Harry was half dressed and flying out the back door to his car. At that point, I couldn't have asked for a more perfect scene. As Harry was peeling away, one of the police cars rounded the corner behind me, saw Harry driving away fast, and gave chase. After pulling in, greeting an excited Catherine, and doing all the couple things, she fell asleep again. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep a wink. The next day, her and her friends were bundled into a car. After they drove away, I had to wait a few hours, but I began to execute my plan. I called my friend who was a removalist and apologized for the late notice but needed my place packed and moved on Friday. After agreeing on a time, I told him that he would need to take certain boxes to a storage facility, which he said wasn't an issue. Then I began packing Catherine's belongings. Later that day, I got a call from the police for me to come and identify some property that they had apprehended from a suspect the previous night that fit the description of property I had reported stolen. I grinned to myself, happy that my plan for Harry had grown to fruition, and replied that I would be there shortly to collect it. Of course, when I got there, some of the items were still unaccounted for, due to the fact that they must have still been in his house and they hadn't searched there yet. By this stage, the town was buzzing with news. Events in my hometown don't stay secret for long. Harry was disgraced and promptly fired for his possession of drugs and stolen property, and our respective bosses on behalf of the company had extended a formal apology towards me during the week. That night I went to my parents' house and told both mine and Rachel's parents what had happened, omitting certain details, and that I was moving back to the city after being promoted, but Catherine wouldn't be a part of it. They were pretty upset initially that I hadn't let them know what was going on, but were happy that I was handling everything maturely and hadn't sunk to their level, thought they didn't agree with ghosting Catherine. But after some drinks, laughs and tears, I went home. On Friday afternoon, after a busy week of organizing cleaners for the following week, the real estate to put my house on the rental market, and various other tasks at my hometown's office, I packed some things into my car and drove to my parents' place and said goodbye before the drive. Before leaving, I went to Becky's house. Becky had been one of Rachel's closest friends growing up. She was the only other person who knew what was happening, minus the details about Harry. Without her help, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything as quickly as I had. I gave Becky a large manila folder with my gathered evidence of her cheating, as well as the letter and a few other legal documents from my attorney stating that she was ordered not to contact me, and the details of how to access her belongings located at the storage unit I had rented out. After a quick goodbye, I left and drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to several missed calls, voice messages, and text messages. Turns out, Catherine had come home early after being alerted to something being afoot in town, only to find an empty house and a for rent sign out the front. Freaking out, she had gone to my parents, who closed the door on her the moment that they answered, forcing her to call everyone until she managed to somehow be contacted by Becky and told that she had a package for her. I was told that she didn't take too well to that, as I fully well knew at that point from the numerous angry texts and voice messages from her accusing me of setting up Harry, of being deceitful, etc. I was worried that she might show up at my front door, but nothing ever happened. 5 weeks later, after leaving and been promoted, I write this out for you, dear reader. Granted, it's long, and it took a few rewrites to shorten it down from my initial 14 pages, double what this story is now, but I feel that most of what I said was important enough for the story. Edit, obligatory thank you, this blew up. Thanks for gilding this account even though it is a throwaway account that I have no intention of using in the future. I am still at work at the moment and will, after I finish, answer as many questions as I can, and provide any other updates that come my way. Edit 2, so I'm home now, and with the number of questions that are here, as well as other comments and messages I have received, I decided to take the time to answer questions and provide some clarity here, save responding to everyone. So one of the questions I keep getting asked is what happened to Harry, why I was so hard coming down on him, and why I would incriminate myself, especially on the internet. After making some inquiries back home to some friends, the short answer is, Harry is looking at a few months in prison as it's his first offense, but could be out sooner, and I felt that it was necessary to the story. No one other than myself knew what I had planned to do with Harry, which is why I omitted a few crucial details that had the potential to truly identify me, as well as change up some of the descriptive language about locations to potentially put this story anywhere in the world. Just for clarification, there was already more than enough evidence in his own home. I just provided the means for the police to further investigate his activity in his home. That being said, I don't regret doing what I did to him, as he knew both Rachel and I growing up, and knew how hard it was for me to pick up my life after she died. For those also asking if I am worried about Harry finding out and pointing the authorities in my direction, I know that he doesn't use Reddit. I know Catherine has an account, but I haven't seen any recent activity to state that she has been on in some time. As for other Reddit users, who knows? Most of the people I am friends with on my main account may recognize this story if they come across it, but as for their browsing preferences outside the subreddits that we frequent on, I can't say. As for Catherine, people have questioned why I didn't do more to her, or why I stuck around for as long as I did. Honestly, I almost did kick her out after a few days, but I wanted to gather evidence and show proof of her cheating so that everyone she knew would know what she had done. She is a major socialite, her words, and I knew by exposing her it would kill her reputation. As for what happened to her, I have been told that she moved to another state just recently after being transferred. From the people I have spoken to today, she was put mainly on administrative duties before her transfer, as there was quite a bit of backlash after the rumor mill made its way around town. People have questioned the legality of what I did to her, moving all her stuff out, sending her and some friends away, spending a good amount on the trip, etc. Morally, I can see that it's a pretty bad move to build up her expectations of what she thought was going to happen. This, combined with killing her status around town, was my ultimate goal, to have her experience what it was like to have everything fall around you. But, from a legal standpoint, I had every right. In the time she had been living with me, she had never updated any of her personal information, driver's license, voting registration, etc., to reflect that she had moved into my house. I found out this information during the course of my preparation with my lawyer after I spoke to our/legal. With no concrete proof on paper to show that she was residing there, and because we hadn't met the de facto status, I was able to do what I did with no threat of backlash. Finally, for those of you saying how my story is fake, that I am a karma, a sociopath, in this day and age, who doesn't have some sociopathic tendencies, and pointing to my malicious compliance story also as proof, I will be honest and let you know that I will not try to change your minds on this. Everyone is entitled to their opinions on stories shared all over Reddit and opinions on those who share them. The story on the other subreddit, however, was to build karma, as my original post on r/pro required to me build up enough before they would allow me to post, as they thought that I might have been a bot. That story, which I only edited in the basics of the conversation because I can't remember all of it, did in fact take place and made national news coverage shortly after. If I ever find the article, I will link it, as it was or was at the time close to one of the largest roaming bills our company had ever passed on to a customer. If there are any further updates, I will let you know. Saul. Dad breaks into our house, we make his life hell. I'd like to start off by saying I'm not sure if this fits here. Compared to the last few stories, this is pretty tame. Part 3 of the Country Justice series. My dad is not a good person by any means of the word, and this is going to involve some serious trauma. Characters: Dad, worst father of all time. Mom, biological. Ryan, my twin brother. Kyan, my older sister. Dusty, my stepfather. The before: way back when Kyan was born, Dad had already fallen off the wagon. The first thing he ever did was physically force Mom into doing drugs, to make sure she stayed with him. Following her birth, things only got worse. While Mom would do what she could, Dad was not happy about having a kid. He'd lock Kyan in her room for days at a time, because obviously you can't make meth while hearing how hungry your child is. 2 years later, Mom was pregnant with Ryan and me. She immediately tried quitting the drugs, and had some success, but having meth is our system, we were at serious risk. Ryan and I were born with huge complications: premature, barely breathing, and weakened immune systems. After that came the worst few months for Mom to endure. While having one kid made Dad angry, having 3 made him fly completely off the handle. It was at this time Mom made the hard decision to call DCFS on herself. She knew we weren't safe and wanted a way for us to escape this situation. Mom willfully signed away her rights to us, and Dad of course wanted to fight. Both were arrested for child abuse and endangerment. Don't cook meth with kids in the house, as well as the drugs. It took 4 years and hundreds of letters for Mom to get into rehab. As this was happening, my siblings and I lived with our grandmother, who we grew up calling Mom. My grandmother had no intention on fully adopting us, but she was left with little choice after a few years. It was either adopt us or we would be taken into DCFS care. Life was better for us mostly. There's a reason I never mention my adoptive father, and we were safe. After a few years in rehab, Mom was able to get back in touch with us. She was welcomed, and I ended up crying because I found out my adoptive mom wasn't my real mom. We did get to leave kindergarten early the day she came home, though. We grew as a family, and it was good. After a few years of this, my adoptive father left the picture. Now everything is actually great. My grandmother passed away in 2017. This was hard for everybody, but especially for Mom. She was devastated, losing the one person who believed she could become clean, a good person, and a great mother. Now, Dad gets put of prison and goes back in every few years, and he usually tries to get in touch when he does. This year was different. We didn't have our grandma to make sure everything would stay safe, and Mom didn't think she could handle seeing him. The mistake. The day comes to bury my grandmother. It was a particularly warm November day. We are all having a hard time and don't deal with grief too well. I stayed with Mom the entire time while Ryan went to our other grandparents to help out. Kyan stayed in her room the whole time. We occasionally checked in on her. Night falls and we are looking through old pictures of Grandma. We were finally able to stop crying. That is until we hear some heavy banging on our door, followed by it swinging open, and in walks Dad. He goes straight to Kyan's room and Mom is simply frozen. This is the first time I've ever seen her this way. He eventually leaves on his own after some screaming and making Kyan cry. He ended up taking her money and then hitting her. Dusty has called the police already. We have a police scanner. Dusty has been outside the whole time, and as soon as Dad left he went to confront him. Mom had to snap herself out of that frozen state and called Dusty inside. She didn't know if Dad was armed or anything and didn't want to take any chances. Dad goes across the street and pulls stuff out of his pocket as the cops pull up. He was dumping his bath salts right in front of the cops. He ends up arrested and we get a restraining order. This is not the last we see of him, though. Over the next few years we hatch a plan to make sure he regrets ever threatening our family again. The plan we managed to come up with was initially supposed to be petty and mildly inconvenient, but it ended up being so much more. We were just going to call the police every week or so on him. If he had something he wasn't supposed to have, back to jail. This didn't work out as planned and the turnout was much more severe. Dad gets out of prison and lives with his mom. Now the problem with this is that we regularly go visit our grandparents, which means he'd either have to leave or we couldn't go. I'm going to call my other grandma Nana to keep things a bit more coherent. Nana would always make him leave if we came over, no matter what temperature, time, or weather conditions. This would also apply to whenever we stay the night. We visited Nana so much after knowing what she'd do to see us. This was just our way of saying screw you to our dad. The thing about this meant he was essentially homeless, didn't have a car, and could barely find a job. When a job did hire him, he'd post in or Nana would tell us. We'd give them a call and have them do a drug test. He always failed the drug tests. So now he's essentially homeless, having the police called on him, and on drugs. He gets tired of this pretty quickly and goes back to Nana's when we are there. A clear violation of the restraining order, so he gets fined. This isn't a meager amount of money either. This ruined his savings. So now he's also broke and got kicked out of Nana's. Now he starts to realize he's pretty screwed. We call the police for a suspicious man sleeping on the sidewalk and he had drugs on him, back to jail. At least he has a bed? After a few times of this he is finally broken, devoid of all hope. He manages to get Nana to let him stay there again, so now we get more updates. This has been going on for months now, and we weren't going to stop. Job, gone. Home, gone. Money, gone. Drugs, gone. Hope, gone. He actually started to be cleaned for a bit. Hard to get drugs if you can't buy them, and when you do they immediately get confiscated. That is until he finds a new woman. He gets back on the drugs thanks to her money. So what do? Get her arrested while he's gone. We are being extra careful not to get him arrested anymore, since he'd end up in federal prison this time. After so many times getting caught with drugs our state sends them to federal. Now we've taken away his girlfriend, too. The effect, all of this has worn him down. He's gone. Anytime he'd regain even a tiny bit of hope, we'd snuff it out. He eventually tries to take his own life. With a gun. That he's not supposed to have. And he fails. So now we get to watch him suffer in the hospital while knowing he gets taken to prison as soon as he heals. We had to make things worse for him. We couldn't let the times we didn't call the police go unnoticed after all. We hide some drugs/ingredients in his dresser, easily noticeable when the police come to search. He now has quite a while in federal prison. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.